Hello, my dear viewers, and welcome back. And I review a lot of Death Battle and other versus shows such as Fan War and occasionally Animation Rewind. And one of the major things I critique is always the matchup of said versus battle. And I've had a lot of people ask me what makes a good matchup, and that's what we're going to talk about today. This is a video I've wanted to make for a long time, but I want to go over what I believe makes a good death battle matchup, and I'm hoping that people, especially those who make versus shows, can look at this video as a way of what to do and what not to do when making a matchup for your show. So let's begin. Now, one of the first things I want to discuss is compatibility. Now, this I believe is very important. If you have two characters and one character has no chance against the other, then that is a huge problem. I've spoken about matchups such as Natsu versus Ace or Hulk versus Doomsday, among many others, and I've spoken how those are bad matchups due to compatibility. And that's always the first thing to look at. You have to look at the character's power and think, are these characters compatible with one another? Now, that doesn't mean they have to be the same exact level of power, but there can't be too vast of a power gap, or else you're gonna run into problems. For example, you wouldn't put Daniel Bryan against Brock Lesnar because Brock Lesnar would completely decimate Daniel Bryan in a matter of seconds. By that same token, you wouldn't put someone like, say, Ace against Natsu, or you wouldn't put someone like Robin against Hulk. Their power gaps are far too vast. So it's important to look at the character's power and abilities and make sure they're compatible. And this doesn't always translate to power, because you could have a character that may not be like overpowered in the sense of raw power or being overly fast, but they might have some kind of broken hack ability that makes it to where the other character basically has no chance against them. Going back to Natsu versus Ace, Natsu has the ability to eat fire, and Ace's whole thing is literally transforming into fire. That's not necessarily good, because Natsu can end the fight whenever he wants and basically drain Ace to gain more power or just kill him. Another perfect example is Toon Force users like Big Head, Bugs Bunny, or SpongeBob SquarePants. They have access to the Toon Force, which is an extremely broken ability to where basically no logic applies to them outside of cartoon logic, and they can basically do whatever the hell that they want.
This is a loaded handgun. And what we're going to do now is kill ourselves because this is horrible.
Couldn't we just stop philatling?
Too late. Chris, this is one of the oldest hobbies in existence. Drinking. Hey, good times. Just walked in.
I say it's duck season, and I say fire! Let's try that again.
So if you were to put someone like Bugs Bunny against, say, John Wick, no matter how badass John Wick might be, he's just not going to be able to hurt Bugs Bunny. That's just the harsh reality of things. And by that same token, you wouldn't put someone who is immune to electricity against someone whose only power is to use electricity. Think about it this way. You're playing Pokemon. Now, someone pulls out an electric type or a Pokemon that has the ability to absorb any and all electric type moves and boost their own power. You wouldn't immediately throw an electric type at that Pokemon unless you were a fucking idiot. By that same token, never put characters against one another that have an immunity to the thing that is basically their whole power. If you have a character who is completely immune to fire, don't throw someone against them whose only ability is to use fire, because by that point, it's a one-sided squash match, and there's nothing you're going to be able to do with that, because the fight, if you actually have them have a fight, it's not going to be realistic, because in the back of the audience's mind, they're going to be thinking, why doesn't he just end the fight in seconds? Why isn't he being one-shot? Or how would his attacks even hurt said character? Even though a lot of the times you are working with fictional characters, it's all about believability, and that's always going to be a factor here. Another matchup I see that people suggest a lot is Jason Voorhees versus Michael Myers. Now, that's not a good matchup idea because Michael Myers has no means to be able to kill Jason Voorhees, and that would cause a shit ton of problems if you had them fight. Now, sure, on the surface, Jason versus Michael Myers might seem like a good matchup, but once you break it down, if Michael can't kill Jason, then he is at an unfair advantage. It was explained in the Friday the 13th lore that Jason was brought back to life through the Necronomicon, and the only way that Jason could be killed is through a member of his bloodline. He was born through a Voorhees, and so shall he die through a Voorhees, which is why Jason is such a pain in the ass for anyone, and I mean anyone, to kill. Even someone like Freddy Krueger can't kill the guy, and Freddy Krueger is pretty overpowered in his own right. So always look out for characters like Jason Voorhees that can only be killed through specific means. Now, that isn't to say that someone like Jason Voorhees is completely invincible and can only be killed by Voorhees. It's more so to say that anyone who doesn't have any kind of ability to kill him, erase him from existence, or has some kind of hack ability to turn the tide, then that character is at a vast disadvantage. Always look at compatibility, always break down the character's power, and make sure that there's some level of balance, or at least a dynamic that could cause a back and forth. As I said, they don't have to be the exact same in the sense of power, because then that ultimately leads to stalemates. But if one is far too powerful to the point where the other character has no chance, you're gonna run into problems. Always keep compatibility in mind, as that is the quickest and easiest way to kill your death battle or your versus battle. A simple example of this is Hulk versus Doomsday. Taking someone who can't be killed through physical force ever again and putting him against a character who can only use physical force to fight his opponents is a terrible idea. Now, regardless of what you think about Hulk versus Doomsday, let's not get into that here. Let's focus on the fact that as a matchup idea, it was a horrible idea because Hulk had no means to be able to kill Doomsday. That is an important thing to note. And this is something that shows like Death Battle don't always take into account, or general audiences that will suggest matchups without understanding things like compatibility or power scaling. Now, the next thing I want to address is this.
You couldn't find two people who have the same powers? Same with Raiden versus Wolverine. Raiden has a sword and Wolverine has claws. you couldn't find another character with claws? Or is it that you knew Raiden had the convenient ability to cut through specifically adamantium? What's next? Are you gonna put Wolverine against Magneto? Hulk vs. Doomsday. Take a person whose only defense is punching and put him against someone who can't die from punching ever again. Guts vs. Nightmare. Put them together because they both have a giant sword. Gee, I couldn't think of anyone else who has a giant sword.
Now, what I want to focus on here is what I like to call clone matchups. The idea of taking two characters and having them fight because they either have the same exact power, the same exact character, or a mixture of both. Now, on paper, the idea of taking two characters that have the exact same power and having them fight isn't inherently a bad idea. However, it is a double-edged sword, for the reasons I have put forward many times before. I have constantly brought up why it's a bad idea to have same elemental matchups, such as Gaara versus Toph, Thor versus Raiden, or Natsu versus Ace. Because if they have the exact same power, then unless they have some kind of hack ability or there's some kind of vast power gap, they will inevitably stalemate, and it restricts what you can do with the fight. I've never been a big fan of people that take two characters and say have them fight because they're basically the same exact guy, or they're the same, or they have the same exact power. I don't think that's a good enough reason. What you should look for is not necessarily that they're the same character or that they have the same exact power, but do these characters possess some kind of ability or characters that could cause an interesting dynamic in the fight? You don't want to feel like you're watching the exact same characters fight each other. For example, if you take two characters that can do nothing but punch stuff and have them fight each other, then there's nothing special about that, because at the end of the day, it's just two people punching each other. You could basically achieve the same effect by taking two people and putting them in suits and just having them punch each other. It's not really all that interesting. In Alien versus Predator Requiem, we see the Predator and the Alien fight each other, but instead of using their unique abilities against each other, the big final battle is just a fist fight, and it's nothing special. It's basically just two people in suits fist fighting, which defeats half the point of having the Alien and the Predator fight each other. So you have to make sure you have an interesting reason for these characters to fight one another, otherwise it's completely pointless. And if you have two characters that are basically the same exact character with maybe a couple minor deviations, then what's the point of watching them fight? Because you're basically watching the same two characters fight each other. It's always important to look for two characters that could have an interesting fight. That's what you should look for. And what I mean by having an interesting dynamic or back and forth is they might have similar characteristics but different powers, or maybe different powers but similar characteristics. Something that could cause some kind of compelling day and night. Here's the best way I can describe it. Think about Batman versus Superman. What makes Batman versus Superman such a compelling fight? Well, it's because you have these two vastly different characters fighting each other. One is about justice, freedom, and fighting to save everyone no matter what it costs. The other is far more dark, using fear to bring about his own justice, going about things from a more vigilante perspective. It's basically like day and night. While they do have some connections, that being that they both fight for justice, they both have their own interpretations of how to achieve that justice. And you also have the interesting dynamic of a overpowered alien versus what amounts to just a really smart human with a lot of gadgets. Now, while we can debate whether or not these two characters are compatible, what makes it interesting is the fact that you have two characters with different ideologies, different characteristics, and vastly different ways of fighting coming together to fight each other, and it makes for an extremely interesting fight. And the idea of only having them fight because, well, they're both superheroes that fight for justice, that's not really all that compelling. So, by that same token, don't have two characters fight because, oh, they both possess fire and they're both hot-headed. That's just not really all that interesting. Or don't do, oh, they're both aliens, so have them fight each other. I mean, unless you have some kind of interesting dynamic like what you have with, say, the Alien and the Predator, then it's not going to make for a very compelling fight at the end of the day. Now, if there's a interesting back and forth, then it'll make for a far more compelling fight. But when you have two characters that are effectively the same thing, you're basically watching the exact same person fight each other. It's the equivalent of watching two wrestlers with no character fight one another. At the end of the day, it's not really all that compelling. You need some kind of story to make the fight interesting, even if it's very tiny, even if the story is told simply through their character. Otherwise, when you don't have that, you might as well just be watching a wrestling match between two average Joes with nothing interesting about them. It's not really all that compelling, but only looking for basic bitch similarities is also not a good idea, such as what Death Battle recently did with Goro versus Machamp. I had mentioned how I felt that was not a very good matchup because at the end of the day, the fight basically amounted to, here are two creatures that have 4 arms and no martial arts. That's just not really all that interesting at the end of the day. So always keep these things in mind when you're looking for a opponent. Sometimes the whole aspect of taking two characters that are the same and having them fight isn't really all that compelling. Sometimes a battle of opposites attract can be far more effective depending on the character that you are using, as you want to have some kind of interesting and compelling banter, fight, choreography, an interesting variation of powers and abilities, and the many other factors that goes into a good fight. Otherwise, at the end of the day, it might as well just be two schmucks punching each other. So that's all I have to say for now. I hope this video was very helpful. While I could go on and on, I think I have made my point clear, and anyone who is watching this video, I hope that you can use this video to help understand what makes a good versus matchup, especially if you have your own versus show. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think there's any points I missed or could have possibly elaborated deeper on? If so, let me know. And if you like videos like this, then let me know, and I would love to make more like this. So leave your thoughts below, and I'll see you guys around next time.